Welcome to True Reddit Reads. I don't even know where to begin because what I'm about to share isn't easy. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you thought you could change them? I used to think I could. I fell for a man who was cold, wounded, and broken, but somehow he made me feel special, like I was the one who could save him. But the truth is, not everyone wants to be saved. The story I'm about to tell isn't just about a broken relationship. It's a journey of control, obsession, isolation, and all the warning signs I chose to ignore. If you've ever loved someone so much that you lost yourself in the process, you need to hear this. Chapter 1: The Rules of Darkness. I grew up in a house where light wasn't just a luxury, it was forbidden. According to my father, light made women vain. Light makes women vain. He would repeat over and over as if it were an unshakable truth. I had heard it since I was little, but no one in the house ever dared to question it. Everything became clear. The day I got my first period, I was just 13. I woke up in a pool of blood, panicked, and had no idea what was happening. But instead of comforting me or explaining, my father just smiled as if this was something he had been waiting for all along. I still remember him standing in the middle of the room, his eyes shining like he had just hit the jackpot. Then he delivered a familiar speech, one I'm sure he had practiced in front of the mirror hundreds of times, about how female hormones activated the vanity gene. He handed me printed articles he had pulled off the internet about the connection between estrogen and body obsession, as if that were scientific proof for his control. Just a few hours later, he began his purification ritual. He removed every light bulb from my room. He sealed all the windows with black plastic, even covering the tiniest cracks. He changed my clothes into a black garbage bag. And he handed me a flashlight with dead batteries. Then he laughed as if it were a joke. "From now on, you will learn humility in the dark," he said. "Your brother needs light to build and work, and you need darkness to learn not to betray." I didn't know what was worse, his words or my mother standing beside him silently crying while helping seal my room. I had never been to school. I was homeschooled, but in reality, I was completely isolated from the world. I didn't know what sunlight on my skin felt like. I thought this was normal. I thought every girl went through this when growing up. But no, I was a sacrifice to a warped belief he called protecting his daughter from the vanity of the world. Even before my period, we were controlled in every way imaginable. We weren't allowed to look in mirrors. We couldn't see our reflection in spoons, glass doors, or water. If we accidentally glanced at a reflective surface, he would make us wear a paper bag on our heads all day. We weren't allowed to wear anything but invisible gray clothing at home. That meant garbage bags. Our hair was cut with kitchen scissors so ugly it could no longer be called hair. And my mother? She never resisted. Once I asked her why, and she whispered, "If you resist, you'll sleep in the garage that night." There were no mattresses there, just a freezing concrete floor in winter. My father had once told me that his own mother, my grandmother, had left him at 12 to become a model. He said she chose her appearance over her son. From that point on, he became obsessed with the idea that mirrors, light, and anything related to beauty were enemies. He didn't need therapy. He didn't need healing. He only needed women under his control, so he would never be abandoned again. And so I, a 13-year-old girl, became the vessel for his fears and rage. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I dared to grow up. Chapter 2: The Early Days of Darkness. At first I thought it was just a transitional phase, that if I behaved and stayed quiet, my father would let the light back in. I counted each day, hoping the sun would stream into my room as some kind of reward. But it never did. Not only did the light never return, but darkness became the only thing I was allowed to live with. I learned to navigate the house by memorizing every step. From the bed to the door was 23 steps. From the door to the bathroom, 41. I lived by memory and by touch. I counted my breaths, counted my steps, counted every time I bumped my head on the walls. And I began to realize the darkness wasn't a temporary punishment. It was a system, a regime. My father in that darkness was the perfect dictator. He would often move furniture in the middle of the night. I would wake up in the morning and crash face first into a wardrobe that had been shifted 3 steps to the left. Once I broke my nose, blood soaked my nightgown. I remember standing there dizzy and panicked while the sound of deranged laughter echoed down from the upper floor. That's when I started to understand he didn't just believe in the darkness. He enjoyed it. He took pleasure in imprisoning me. I ate in the dark, never knowing what I was biting into. Some days I brought the spoon to my forehead instead of my mouth. Once I licked a fork by mistake, and every stain on my clothes, every mark on my skin. I couldn't see them, only learned about them when my father told my brothers in a mocking tone, "Look at that, the little monster's eating like a pig. Almost all her nails have fallen off." I tried to imagine myself once, a little girl who loved wearing floral dresses, tying ribbons in her hair, grinning because my mother praised me. Now I had no idea what I looked like. I couldn't even remember my own face. And then the worst happened, Emma. My sister was just 11 when she got her first period, and in a single night, she too was dragged into the darkness with me. I heard her crying from the next room, the twisting of the lock, the rustle of plastic bags as my mother forced her to change. By midnight, Emma sneaked into my room. We sat close together on the floor, hand in hand, like two blind survivors in a world without color. I told her it'll be okay, but I lied. We both knew better. The longer we lived in the darkness, the more we withered. Hair fell out, skin grayed. I smelled the rot of my own body. Emma's nails began to separate from her flesh. Her teeth loosened. Her eyes grew dim. Every time she vomited in the dark, I couldn't see anything. I only heard the sobs, the gurgling stomach, my mother quietly crying outside the door but never stepping in. My father called all of it body purification. "You will learn what humility means," he said. "You will not become women like my mother." I began to pray, not to God. I prayed to anything that would listen, the light, the wind, the moon, just once to see the real world. But I also knew if we kept waiting, we would die in that house. And death in the darkness didn't mean peace. It was just a way to vanish without anyone realizing we had ever existed. Chapter 3. Emma and the Darkness. I used to think nothing could be worse than living in the dark. But then Emma came along and I realized the only thing worse was watching someone you love get swallowed up the same way you were. Emma was nothing like me. She was warm, gentle, always finding ways to make me laugh, even on the worst days. She was the only reason our house didn't feel completely cold and empty. And then, on her 11th birthday, her body changed. My mother noticed a small streak of blood on her underwear, and just a few hours later, Emma's bright little room was sealed off with black plastic. I heard the tape ripping the scissors, screeching, my mother sobbing quietly down the hallway. That night, Emma stood at my door, wearing her first trash bag, trembling and silent. I pulled her in, held her tightly, and for the first time in months, we cried without making a sound. I told her what awaited her, that she would never look in a mirror again. That light would corrupt her. That father would make her learn to live by touch and memory alone. She said nothing, just nodded quietly. The following days we lived like two shadows. Emma held my hand every time we stepped out of a room. She didn't know where the bathroom was. I guided her. She didn't know where the food was. I showed her. She smelled the dried blood on my clothes, I smelled the vomit on her hands. We were no longer children. We were victims of a twisted belief system. At first, Emma still hoped. She whispered, "Maybe if I'm good, Father will forgive me." She tried to pray. She read aloud the Bible verses Mother taught her, but the light never came, and God remained silent. I will never forget the day Emma lost her first tooth. Not because it was time to lose a baby tooth, but because her severe vitamin D deficiency had caused her gums to shrink. I heard the tooth fall to the floor, and I heard her gasp, "Sis!" I knelt and fumbled under the table, searching for that tiny tooth, as if picking up a piece of a stolen childhood. I gripped it in my hand until it bled, and I promised myself I would get her out of here, even if it meant dying. But to bring someone out of the darkness, you first have to find the light yourself. And in that house, the only light came from the one person I never expected, Michael. But that is another story. Chapter 4. Hope from a Flashlight. Michael was my older brother. 2 years older than me, he was Dad's pride and joy, the heir to the light, as he liked to call him. In our house, sons were allowed to go outside, learn trades, and experience the real world. Daughters lived like ghosts. I used to hate Michael for that. Not because he had privileges, but because he stayed silent. Silent when I was locked up. Silent when Emma was dragged away in tears. Silent when Father told lies at the dinner table about two little female demons corrupted by light. But one night, while I was sitting with my head in my hands, writhing from constant headaches, deprived of vitamin sunlight and clarity, Michael opened my door just a crack. He didn't say a word. He didn't step inside. He just placed something on the floor, then quietly closed the door. It was a tiny flashlight keychain, the kind of cheap toy you get at a fair. But to me it was a miracle. I trembled as I twisted the switch, not daring to hope. And then a faint beam flickered to life, weak but enough for me to see something for the first time in almost 2 years. My own hands. I had imagined countless times how I would feel seeing the world again, but no. The first thing I felt was horror. My hands were gray, covered in bruises, scratches, dried blood, nails broken and jagged, the skin peeling. I didn't even recognize myself. I cried, not from relief, but because finally I could see the truth that the darkness had hidden. 3 days later, Michael came back. This time he waited for me to open the door. I peered at him through the crack, the thin light from the feeble flashlight illuminating the face of the once invisible older brother. He looked scared too, but he whispered, "Dad doesn't know about the flashlight. If you're ready, you can escape. My window is always open, but only when it's completely quiet." I nodded. We began planning. Michael described every corner of the house, telling me how to climb out the second-floor window, how to avoid the security cameras, how to distract Father with fake arguments. But he always warned, wait for the perfect moment. If you're caught, there's no second chance. I promised I would wait. I swore. But I couldn't keep that promise. 3 nights later, when Emma vomited blood, when I felt her third tooth fall out with no sign of pain, I knew if I waited any longer, I would lose her. I didn't wait. I grabbed the flashlight and went. Chapter 5. Twisted Truths. I had never seen the moon outside shine so brightly. Just after crawling through Michael's window and climbing down the way he had shown me, I had fallen 3 times. The tiny flashlight helped me navigate, but everything out there, the light, the sound of insects, the wind whipping through my hair, made me feel like I was about to dissolve. I was no longer human. I was a creature that had lived stealthily in darkness for too long. And now, the light was burning me from the inside out. I remember crawling across the neighbor's lawn, blood from my knees, dripping with every step. I didn't ring the doorbell. I tapped 3 times lightly, the way my mother had taught me as a child. And Catherine, the neighbor, appeared. I don't know how I looked in that moment, but when she saw me, she didn't scream. She just pulled me into a tight hug, and then she cried. She didn't ask right away what had happened. She just let me sit in her kitchen under the ceiling light while I stared at the bulb as if it were a miracle. I thought that was the end, that I had escaped, but I forgot one thing. My father doesn't give up easily. Only a few hours after Catherine called Child Protective Services, he filed a complaint against her, accusing her of kidnapping a daughter with a rare, light-sensitive genetic disorder. He showed up with a lawyer, carrying stacks of medical records as thick as an encyclopedia, and dozens of signatures from neighbors demanding the sick child be returned to an appropriate treatment environment. They even organized a public prayer outside Catherine's house. They held signs that read, "We believe in healing, not in hatred." And I, the girl who had almost died after 2 years trapped in darkness, was labeled a rebel. I was taken for a medical examination. The results were undeniable. Severe vitamin D deficiency. Loose teeth. Bones brittle as an elderly person's. Arms that had been broken, but never properly set. But do you know what was the most terrifying part? My father had an explanation for everything. It's hereditary, he told the doctors, the police, anyone who would listen. She has an extremely rare syndrome. We've been caring for her at home because no medical facility understands this condition like we do. And me, I sat under Catherine's kitchen table, covering my eyes, grinding my teeth, because the light hurt. When the police asked why I had run away, I couldn't open my eyes to answer, and not looking at them made them suspicious. Whenever I tried to tell the truth, he had a story to discredit it. When I said Emma was dying in the dark, he said I was suffering from delusional disorder. When I said I had once broken my arm and wrapped it myself with old cloth, he just smiled nice. She's always been creative. And when I tried to call for Michael's help, he looked straight at me and said softly, "She has a history of making things up. After Grandpa died, she started imagining entire alternate worlds." I realized one thing: the truth doesn't matter as much as who tells it. And my father had always been better at telling stories than I ever could be. Chapter 6. Father manipulates the entire system. I used to think that just escaping would be enough. Just stepping out of that dark room into the light and telling the truth, people would believe me. I was wrong. I had forgotten that my father didn't just control our family. He controlled an entire town. Within 24 hours of my leaving home, the first post appeared on the local community Facebook group. His profile picture bloodshot eyes, a forced smile accompanied by the words, "Please pray for my daughter. She is going through a severe episode and has been taken away from the specialized treatment environment we built with all our love and sacrifice." Hundreds of comments poured in. People shared it. I was labeled a rebellious child tearing apart the family. No one asked why I ran. No one asked why my eyes couldn't bear the light. No one saw my fallen nails, my deformed bones, or the terror I carried in every breath. My father showed up at the hospital wearing a perfectly ironed shirt, carrying a briefcase, and a new girlfriend. A local homeschool teacher who had once smiled and greeted me when I was a child. She stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, and told the nurse, "I used to teach this girl. She has always been sensitive, but he is a devoted father. He only wants to protect her from a cruel world." And just like that, I became the child with a disorder in need of treatment in the eyes of the hospital staff. When I said that light had been forbidden, they nodded. That's sensory control therapy. When I said I had been forced to wear a garbage bag, they replied, "A method to reduce anxiety triggers." It was unbelievable. Every act of abuse had been rationalized under the guise of medical and religious care. A psychologist who had never met me signed a paper claiming I had tendencies toward imagination fabrication and dissociation from reality based entirely on my father's description. I scoffed as I read the report. A girl who had been locked in darkness for 2 years now declared detached from reality. How could I maintain my sense of self in a world where there was nothing to see? I tried to speak up. I begged to see a social worker. I told every story. I showed them my fallen nails, my scars, how the light made my eyes bleed. But they just took notes, stayed silent, and asked again, "Do you think you might be exaggerating due to psychological trauma?" I wanted to scream, but I was exhausted. Every word I spoke was a battle. Every second under the hospital lights was torture. And while I struggled to hold on to the fragments of truth, my father played the misunderstood hero. He gave speeches at church, organized prayer groups for lost children, and collected dozens of signatures demanding my custody be returned to him. Catherine, the only person who had helped me, was painted as a family destroyer. Eggs were thrown at her car. Neighbors avoided her. Anyone who once greeted her now turned away in the market. And me, I was monitored for every movement, every frown, every silence, every stare at the ceiling. They called it a symptom. I was no longer the storyteller. I was a living medical file, a case study, a girl labeled delusional, simply for daring to recount the hell I had lived through. And the worst part, I began to believe them. Chapter 7. Mother, the Silent One. If anyone had asked me that day who betrayed me the most, I would have said father, without thinking. But later, when everything calmed down, when I was sober enough to look back, I realized the deepest pain didn't come from the one who inflicted it. It came from the one who saw it all and did nothing. My mother. Throughout my childhood, she was the silent figure in the kitchen, the one making tea every evening, the one mending clothes when I tripped, the one wiping away my tears with her sleeve, then turning away as if they had never fallen. I used to believe she was also a victim, that she was controlled, oppressed, powerless, until I found her prayer journal. Michael had secretly taken it from the attic, slipped it into an envelope, and hidden it in a cookie tin. I opened it in the hospital hands, shaking, heart hammering. Inside were hundreds of pages, blue ink, round neat handwriting filled with entries that read like sermons. Lord, please grant inner light to my daughter, so she will not need the light of this world. Each time her nails fall, I know the darkness is doing its work. Emma vomited blood this morning. Perhaps it is a sign of purification. I remember sitting in silence for hours after reading it, not crying, not screaming, not throwing up, just paralyzed. My mother wasn't coerced. She was a believer. She believed that if she could tame her daughter, Father would love her again. She believed obedience would save the family. She believed our pain would be the ticket to absolve him of his abandoned past. She didn't resist the darkness. She counted every second we lived in it and called it faith. Once I had written a letter asking for help and hid it under my pillow. The next day, Father said nothing, but Mother entered the room, holding the letter half burned, handed it to me, and said only, "Do not let words make you arrogant." I used to think her silence was weakness, but now I understand. She was silent by choice, because she chose acceptance over protection. She chose forgiveness for the controller rather than standing up for her own daughter. And that to me was worse than any punishment. The pain from someone you love when they stand still and watch you fall is never like the pain from an enemy. It simmers quietly, and it kills you from within. I no longer call her mother in my mind. I call her the one who did not speak. And in the worst dreams, she never holds a rod. She just stands there nodding and writing everything down. Chapter 8. Finding the clues. I don't know what kept me from giving up. Maybe it was the faint light from the flashlight Michael had given me. Maybe it was the image of Emma slowly losing teeth and believing it was purification. Or maybe simply it was because I was just too tired of staying silent. In the hospital, between assessments, psychological evaluations, artificial lights, and whispered doubts, I began to piece together fragments of the truth. I remember one time my mother accidentally spoke the password to the family cloud account while she was organizing pictures in the dark. I pretended not to notice at the time, but now I use that small detail to access the hospital iPad I logged in. It took a few minutes for all the images, files, and digital journals to sync, but when they appeared, I knew I was no longer alone. Father had photographed us throughout the treatment. Every image, every note, every piece of metadata was meticulously recorded. Week 6, skin turning pale. Emma lost 3 kilo, good sign. No mirrors, plus point. He wasn't just controlling us. He was documenting our deterioration like an experiment. I also found search history from before I even had my first period. Symptoms of vitamin D deficiency. How to create an artificially dark environment. Faking medical records. Is it legal? Light sensitivity disorders? Real or not? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because his perfect fabricated control had cracked. And this time I had proof. Not stories, not feelings, but images, dates, GPS coordinates, digital traces that could not be denied. Michael even found something else, pictures my mother had secretly taken during the purification process. Not to accuse, but to convince Father that we were now pure enough to be allowed the light again. Mother photographed me when I was gaunt, my eyes sunken veins showing under pale skin. She wrote notes. She has wasted away enough. Perhaps now he will forgive. I don't know which hurt more, Father's cruelty or Mother's twisted belief in unconditional love disguised as torture. I collected everything I could. Screenshots, metadata, PDF files, Mother's journal, even emails from a doctor who had never examined me but had signed off, confirming a hereditary light sensitivity condition. I called his office pretending to be Father's secretary asking about a follow-up appointment, and he over the phone confirmed, if it's his daughter, just use the same diagnosis as last time, no need for another exam. I recorded it, and I knew the real battle was only just beginning. Chapter 9. The Courtroom and the Counterattack. The first court hearing wasn't at all what I imagined. I didn't walk in bathed in a halo of justice. There was no cinematic music swelling as I raised my hand to swear an oath. There was no collective gasp in the courtroom as I presented my evidence. In reality, I was just a girl hoodie pulled over my head, trembling under the harsh ceiling lights, trying to keep my composure while my father sat 3 rows away, clutching his chest, eyes glistening like a man shattered by false accusations from his own daughter. But this time I didn't come to court with tears. I came with proof. My lawyer began presenting files from the cloud. Photos of me with hollow eyes, cracked lips, hands clawing at walls. Photos of Emma shivering in a sleeping bag in the middle of summer in a room sealed with black tape. Metadata notes, time, location, device, undeniable. My father's lawyer objected to every slide, but when the expert metadata analysis confirmed none of the files had ever been tampered with, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence. Then came my testimony. I stood there, the ceiling lights still stabbing at my eyes, but I no longer shielded them. I let them see my red, swollen eyes, my trembling hands, my hoarse voice. I spoke about the steps I took in darkness, about counting every stride from bed to door to bathroom, just to avoid banging my head on the walls. I spoke about the smell of shed nails, rotting hair, the stench of a childhood decayed. I spoke about the tiny flashlight, the first light I'd seen in 2 years, brought by my brave brother. I spoke about the night I ran away, knees ripped, yet feeling like I was soaring simply because I got to see the sky. And then I spoke about Emma, about her teeth falling clattering to the floor, about her nightly whispered prayers, God, please forgive me for missing the light. On the defendant's bench, my father wept. The room stirred, but not because of my words, because he cried so convincingly. He cried like a betrayed father, as if he were the victim. Then he stepped up to the podium, and pulled from his pocket a handwritten letter from my mother. In it, she wrote that I had shown signs of delusion ever since Grandpa died, that I was making up stories to feel special, that the light was causing my mind to unravel, and darkness was the only way to keep me safe. I froze. I didn't know what was worse, that she had written it, that he forced her to write it, or that I had once believed she would stand by me. The courtroom wavered again. Somehow my father had turned the very photos documenting my deterioration into proof of a genetic condition. But I had one trump card left. Michael had recorded a phone call, the call with the doctor who had diagnosed me without ever meeting me. His voice, clear as day. If it's his patient, just leave the file as is. No need for another exam. I trust him. The courtroom fell silent. Father's lawyer shrugged, calling it a communication mishap, but the eyes around the room had changed. For the first time, I wasn't a delusional child. I was a living witness. The hearing adjourned. My father sat there dazed, eyes red, staring at me. No anger, no hatred, just the gaze of a man beginning to realize the world he had built was cracked. I didn't know if I had won, but for the first time I wasn't just running, I was fighting back. Chapter 10. The Verdict and the Aftermath. When the judge read the verdict, I didn't cry. There was no relief, no sense of victory, only emptiness. The sentence came after 3 weeks of debates, cross-examinations, tests, evaluations, and countless times I had to repeat the same story just so people would believe I hadn't made up my own life. The court declared my father sentenced to 5 years in prison with mandatory psychological treatment. The reason was not only abuse, but systematic abusive behavior disguised as special care and religious devotion. My mother not imprisoned, but placed under long-term supervision and required therapy. The court called her both a victim and an accomplice. They acknowledged that she had been under control, but also that she had actively participated in the cycle of abuse. Me transferred to a specialized care center for adolescents recovering from abuse. Emma enrolled in a gradual light therapy program minute by minute, step by step, to help him reacclimate to the world. Michael granted temporary guardianship by distant relatives. He deserved a childhood free from the shadow of having been born into abuse. When my father heard the verdict, he didn't scream. He didn't wail. He just bowed his head, closed his eyes, and sighed as if the world he had built through obsession had utterly collapsed. Yet what I cannot forget was the moment he turned to look at me in the courtroom. No anger, no hatred, just a vacant gaze, as if he still couldn't understand how everything had become this way. He truly believed he was protecting us, and that was what made him the most dangerous. My mother didn't look at me during the trial. She kept that gaunt face turned toward the door hands, clutching a thin Bible like an invisible shield. She spoke only once, when her lawyer asked if she had anything to say to me. She whispered, "I just wanted you to be pure, so you could be received by God's light." I didn't respond. I only looked at her like she was a stranger. Catherine, the neighbor who had opened her door for me that night, was shunned by the entire neighborhood. Her house was vandalized, tires slashed, anonymous letters left. "The family destroyer will not find peace." She never abandoned me. And perhaps I had never truly had a mother other than her. The community I grew up in fractured. The church split into 2 camps, one defending parents' rights to raise their children in faith, the other condemning it as organized abuse. One group created a website, Prayers for the Misunderstood Father. Another began campaigning to reform homeschooling oversight laws. I didn't care which side was right. I only knew that I had survived. Not because of justice, but because of the faint light from a small flashlight and the kindness of a neighbor. This was not the ending I had hoped for. No triumphant chimes, no raised arms, no curtain falling. Only wounds that would take time to heal, a girl learning to live in the light, and a single promise I would never live in darkness again. Not for anyone. Not for any reason called love. Chapter 11. The Journey of Recovery. I thought that after the trial, after the verdict, after my father was convicted and my mother put under supervision, everything would end. That I would step into the light, hold my head high, and start a new life. But no one told me. Freedom hurts almost as much as captivity. They took me to a foster home, a therapeutic house for survivors, teenagers like me. There I had a window, a desk lamp, a mirror in the bathroom. But during the first week, I didn't dare turn on the light. I was afraid, not of the light itself, but of the feeling that I didn't deserve to live in it. I had grown used to being an animal in the dark. Now, every time I entered a supermarket, I didn't know which way to go. Colors made me dizzy. Fluorescent lights burned my eyes like knives. The doctor called it sensory recovery syndrome. I called it the aftermath. I still didn't know how to interact like a normal person. I didn't know what to say at the dinner table. Didn't know when to smile. Couldn't understand why people complained about too much homework when they had light friends and the freedom to choose their clothes. I had no friends. And when a boy at the foster home asked me what's wrong with your eyes, I answered bluntly, I lived in darkness for 2 years, so my father would think I wasn't a frivolous girl. He laughed, thought I was joking. I wasn't. The doctor suggested I keep a journal. I tried, but I didn't know what to write except for empty lines like today, I saw green. It hurts my eyes. Today, I saw blood on my thigh and realized I'm still alive. Today, I thought of Emma. I wonder if she forgives me. Michael sent letters. He was still living with relatives back in school playing basketball. He said he felt guilty. I told him he didn't have to. He had given me the first light, enough for me to step out. And for me, that was more than enough. Emma, I hadn't seen her since the trial. The doctor said she needed time. She was still undergoing light therapy, starting with 30 seconds a day, slowly increasing. The last I heard, she had endured 5 minutes under daylight without screaming. I wanted to believe she was moving toward the light, step by step, minute by minute. Just like me. Catherine kept in touch. She told me someone had smashed her window and left a crudely written note, "Your light is God's darkness." I asked if she regretted it. She just smiled. If I could go back, I'd open that door that night, and I'd do it again. I thought, that was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. Chapter 12. I'm no longer a good husband. I know I'm not perfect. I used to be the type of person who tried to do everything right, work hard, love my wife, be considerate to my family. But that day, looking at the ashes of the collection I had spent over 2 decades building, I realized something important. I no longer wanted to be the good husband. What does a good husband even mean? Does it mean staying silent when your wife disregards your passions? Pretending to understand when someone destroys what matters most to you and then expects sympathy? Enduring quietly because you think sacrifice is required to keep the family peaceful? I had lived that way. But when my sister sent me that video, the irrefutable proof that my wife had staged everything, deliberately turned that room into a hellscape, and just watched it burn every boundary inside me, collapsed. I was no longer angry. I felt empty. As if I had just woken up from a long dream and realized that all along I had loved a version of someone who didn't exist. The woman I once believed was my soulmate. Turns out she was just a constructed shadow, built from expectations control and selfishness. I filed for divorce the next day. She cried, pleaded, saying it was an accident, that she only wanted me to grow up, to let go of the trivial things and focus on the future. But I didn't listen anymore. Those words were no different than the excuses of someone who just shattered your heart and then claimed it was an accident. I moved out, rented a small apartment, empty but free. I started over, not with the massive numbers or expensive models, but with the pieces that remained the genuine memories. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. My friends, the ones my wife had once dismissed as big kids, they were the ones who helped me stand up. They didn't laugh at my pain. They brought me small model scraps of paper and whispered, "Start over? For yourself." I also started writing a blog, telling my story. Not to blame anyone, but to tell people like me out there, if you have to sacrifice your true self to maintain a relationship, then that relationship isn't worth keeping. Some people called me childish for leaving my wife over a few toys. I didn't argue. They had no idea those weren't toys, they were memories, identity, the things that made me feel alive. Now, when I look back, I don't feel regret. I am no longer the good husband, but I am a free man. And I think that's enough. And that's my story. A journey from passion to pain, from hope to despair. People have asked me, why didn't you leave sooner? But if you've ever loved someone toxic, you'll understand. Leaving is never easy. I'm not telling this story for pity. I'm telling it as a warning. If someone makes you feel smaller, weaker, or afraid of yourself, that is not love. That is manipulation. And if you're in a relationship like that, know this, you are not alone. You deserve to be loved in a way that doesn't hurt you. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to True Reddit Reads so we can keep sharing the truths that deserve to be heard.